Okay, we're just about 5 after, so let's get started. Thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to today's event, CHIA, Tiny Seed with Big Potential, Nutrition, Health, and Sustainability. My name is Danielle Ballantyne. I am a registered dietitian and nutrition communications and strategy consultant. CHIA has long been recognized as a nutritious food, but this tiny seed has a rich history contributing to sustainable nutrition and agriculture. We have a wonderful lineup for you today, and through our speakers, you're going to hear a little bit about what science has uncovered about this impressive seed, emerging research on omega-3 ALA, and product innovation such as chia oil. Before I hand it over to our first speaker, I want to quickly cover just a couple logistics. We are recording this event today, so please be mindful of that, and we'll be circulating the recording after the event, hopefully by tomorrow. And then if you have any questions throughout the event, please drop them into the chat box. We're going to cover those at the end. We'll get to as many as we can as possible. If we don't get to all of them today, we'll cover them individually afterward. But thanks again for being here. We're so thrilled to have so many of you in the room. And now I'm going to hand it over to Sandra Gillot to get us started.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Sandra Gillot. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Benexia and our chia consumer brand Seeds of Wellness. So I'm talking here from Chile, where I live since 23 years now. I am originally from Belgium. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our goal here is to grow your knowledge and hopefully inspire you about chia seed and particularly chia oil. We also hope to get to know you better by answering your questions and staying in touch after the event. I know many of you are familiar with chia seed and likely cook with them often, hopefully, but many of you probably don't know that chia oil is world's largest or most concentrated natural source of the essential omega-3 ALA fatty acids. It has been more than 20 years now that I had the opportunity to even know about the existence and potential of chia seed, actually originally through a Belgian company specialized in omega-3 nutrition. Its owner was a scientific person and believed this seed could be the solution for a worldwide omega-3 deficiency and supply. Getting to know the seed better, I was quickly convinced that yes, we could save the world with chia. With its high fiber, virtually carb-free, chia is gluten-free with high quality and notable levels of plant protein containing all essential amino acids, and in particular, its high omega-3 and low omega-6 level. So in the early 2000s, I got to know my partner in Argentina. He's from Bolivia and had been growing chia in Argentina for some years. Alberto, on the picture, was fortunately also convinced he could save the world with chia. So that was our initial team with that clear mission and a lot of energy and dreams. And thank God, as we really didn't know what was the incredible adventure and real professional and personal journey we were about to embark on. My partner and the growers were organized as a group of chia growers at that time, passionate about the seed, about nature, about humanity in general, and with them, we created Benexia in 2005 with the mission to bring natural, healthy, and sustainable chia to consumers worldwide. But at this time, no one knew about chia, right? By the way, Benexia is from the Latin bene for good, well-being, and CHIA is for chia. We say today Benexia. Our company is owned 50% by our farmers responsible for our agricultural production. So Benexia has over that time developed the agricultural industry for chia in South America, bringing it on the map as an alternative and economically sustainable crop for growers in Argentina, Bolivia, and Paraguay, and developing the market at the same time, right? With huge consideration for the value of the land as the main assets for the grower, we developed chia crop genetics, know-how, and techniques over more than 20 years now, under the same standards that have always guided us as what is referred today as regenerative agriculture, a real buzzword these days, as I'm sure you all know. We have always upkept all the principle of the land conservation and sustainability that comes with it to deliver year after year the same quality nutrients through our beautiful tiny seeds. Chia seeds are one of the most sustainable crops in the world. I don't want to enter too much into details here, but just to let you know, agriculture in South America is very modern in the sense that they have learned from the wrong practices other countries are suffering from today. Intensive agriculture has high costs for the planet and for the growers too at the end. The lands that are hosting chia are organized with natural barriers between chia fields, which consist of native forests that you see on the picture on the left, to grow and thrive while supporting the well-being and reproduction of the local fauna and flora. No-till farming is the norm. This is a technique that minimizes soil disturbance, leaving the organic matter from harvest to harvest on the soil and storing directly on this organic cover. This layer of organic matter covers the ground, allowing the soil to retain water and moisture, limit erosion, retain more nutrients, reduce CO2 emissions, and preserve insect life. This all ensure a pure, consistent, top quality and nutritionally dense chia seed. Solely on rainwater as a watering source. This is another benefit from this crop. In these years, we have become an industry reference for expert advice on chia best practices in the fields of sowing, pre-sowing techniques, on cultivation management, on harvesting activities, and on the provision of excellent natural crop genetics. A good thing about chia crop is that it can grow anywhere in our region as an alternative winter crop. It fits perfectly the careful planning and balance between the yields farmers need to obtain from the land and the crop rotation and the resting time it needs. So chia crop actually brings benefits to the grower. That is very nice. And this is important as it totally solves the availability issue. Sustainability and availability are two key points to reach a successful industry development. And I'm talking chia as an industry. And that is what we have been working towards and dreamt of creating these years. Well, quality considerations we've taken at Benexia right through how we harvest and then process the chia seed have led us to quickly obtain certifications for this fairly new industrial crop. And here we faced some hurdles, as the fact that, for example, chia did not exist in the Codex Alimentarius. The Codex gathered all the international recognized standards published by the Food and Agriculture Organization. So there was no standard definition of the A-GRAS status or no authorization, no nothing. Benexia has literally defined the specification for chia seed and chia oil for regulatory authorities like the US Pharmacopoeia or Novel Food Authorization in Europe. We've done practically everything, and the same in Asia. Throughout the years, we've had growing need for more science on chia. The reason why our networking with universities has always been important. We are collaborating with some of them, whether it is needed for some product approval, testing for things like allergenicity, toxicity, preclinical, clinical research to support health benefits or potential health claims. We have an approved health claim in Japan for blood pressure reduction. And today there is a lot of new research on chia seed flourishing out there and bringing more good news on its benefits for human health, and that will certainly motivate more research on the seeds in the future. So back on Benexia and the chia market developments around 2010, chia received national and international buzz on talk shows like Oprah, and this is when Benexia started looking at how to make chia part of everyone's diet, which was one of our objectives, and put everywhere in our food as an ingredient. So we cracked those tiny chia seeds into parts to be able to introduce it in the food industry and start offering chia-based ingredient solution, chia protein, chia fiber, chia oil, And this is when Banexia became further established up in the north of Chile in 2015, opening its first environmentally conscious, state-of-the-art industrial plant, as we are now an ingredient manufacturing company. And our ingredients are all produced sustainably without use of water, solvents, or enzymes. It's all mechanical, clean, and natural, and you can see our plant in Areca on the screen. Today, our customers are business-to-business and food companies that use our ingredients as a source of high-quality nutrition, but also as a water retention agent, texturizer, replacing gums and other binders or hydrocolloids with a more sustainable 100% natural solution. And our consumer brand, So Seeds of Wellness, allows you and others to know our products too. So yes, Banexia is an industry leader in CHIA. We are leading the CHIA revolution. We are 100 people strong, working in South America with partners in the US, Canada, Europe, Asia, and we are producing in several regions and exporting in 20 different countries around the globe. As I mentioned earlier, 50% of our company is owned by our growers or farmers, and also we are multicultural, multi-ethnic, and very inclusive. 40% of our employees are female. We are passionate, and we all believe in this future big industry. Just a couple of comments about this year's CHIA crop before I wrap up. We are in the planting season now. We are sowing about 10,000 hectares. It's like 25,000 acres. We are growing in acreage this year. Currently, the farms in Bolivia, Paraguay, and Argentina have already been planted, and 20% still needs to be sowed in the weeks ahead. We're starting to see green shoots appear and some flowers already in our earliest sowed fields. In a few short months, fields of purple flowers will replace the early green seedlings and remaining brown earth. And you can see these beautiful images that are from last year, but anyway, it's chia fields growing here. 2024 season looks promising for chia at this stage, actually. And to share a few 2024 highlights, I'm very proud of Banexia while I conclude my remarks today. Danielle, we are on track to obtain the B Corp certification for our entire company, farms, headquarters, our plants. That has been a multi-year process and no small task. We're happy about that. We will be also issuing our first corporate social responsibility, which is like a sustainability report in 2024. So we hope you will keep Banexia and So in mind whenever you think of CHIA, please. We hope we can be a resource for you to support your work and be your source for all CHIA questions. Though I could keep talking CHIA and talk CHIA all day, I will thank you again for being here today and pass things over to our nutritional expert, Dr. Wendy Bazinet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandra. And hello, everyone. I know I have colleagues and friends and new faces in the room today. And if you don't already feel sort of inspired and passionate about CHIA, we will continue that mission through our time together. I met Sandra actually late fall 2021. We were still in the throes of the pandemic when she made a trip up to Southern California, and I started working with Banexia and So in early 2022, just kicking off the year. I already knew a little bit about CHIA nutrition, as the registered dietitians on the line probably did as well, because of some of that buzz that was created. And I did a TV segment in 2010 and wrote an article about CHIA, and I grew a CHIA pet, maybe some laughs on the line here, in order to sort of bridge the story from how we used to know CHIA to the CHIA nutrition story. But why this collaboration has been so wonderful, and I've been working on some nutrition communications and strategy, and Danielle on the team as well for the last couple of years with them now, is the wonderful intersection of my other passion. My first degree is Spanish language and literature. My second master's degree is in Latin American studies. And so I get to have meetings on a weekly basis in Spanish and English, sometimes other languages that come back to Spanish and English, on a topic that I love, which is my doctorate in public health and nutrition, which is nutrition science. So getting started here, what I hope to share with you is a little bit of, hopefully for the dietitians in the room and the health journalists, a brief background, some nutrition research, and then for those, and I know we have some industry members, some applications like tapping into the trends. So as we look at the background on CHIA, it has a rich history and tradition. It's one of the things that I love about talking about nutrition is sort of the backstory. The tradition dates back more than 3,500 years in the Aztec and Mayan civilizations, thanks to the natural quality of its nutrients. You know, I love to say, I exclaimed this one time on a stage accidentally. I said, I love when modern science shows what Mother Nature knows. I mean, we sort of knew these things before we knew them, and people were already sustaining themselves with chia seeds 3,500 plus years ago. Chia actually translates in Mayan to strength. And they were carried by warriors because they were so tiny, but such substantive nutrition. And we didn't have to have the science then to know that. We just knew that it worked. It was so valuable, in fact, that it was used as a form of currency by the Aztecs during a period of time. But as history runs its course, you know, the crop was actually banned in the 1500s when the Spaniards arrived to South America and largely lay dormant as a crop for a couple hundred of years. So chia production is relatively new again, even though it goes back so many years. It sort of unexpectedly and enthusiastically reemerged in the late 20th century, and that's why we sort of knew of it as the chia pet, and then evolved into the buzz of the nutrition properties that it actually held. So most of us refer to chia as a seed. Of course, we said seed already. It's technically an ancient grain, so you can add that to your list on your next story about ancient grains. Chia is one of them. And as Sandra mentioned a few minutes ago, chia's superpower, of course, is its ALA, the omega-3, the plant-based omega-3 alpha-linolenic acid. It is the highest form of ALA found in nature by concentration, but it's not just that. Some of you know already that it's a source of fiber, it has a quality protein, and it's a matrix of other nutrients that have shown to support gut health, cardiovascular health, and other areas I'll touch on in a moment. In addition to being an excellent source of omega-3, 1 teaspoon has the full daily recommendation for the essential fat omega-3. It's also an excellent source of fiber, an excellent source of magnesium and phosphorus, as well as a good source of calcium, iron, copper, manganese, and selenium. I mentioned that this is in 2 tablespoons. So this isn't the 100-gram equivalent, which is also an important reference, but in a realistic sort of culinary dose, so to speak, excellent sources and good sources for you. 63% of the total fat in chia oil is the omega-3 ALA. I mention this also because it's a good reminder for all of us who deal with or talk about the fats, that fats and oils are usually a combination of the various PUFAs, MUFAs, and saturated fats. They're not just one thing, even though we call out their predominant one, and chia oil is 63%. I mentioned a moment ago that it's more than the full daily recommendation intake in 1 teaspoon. To reground us also on those omega-3s, we won't go into the deep dive today, but since we're talking about them, and Dr. Bazinet is going to be touching on some of this as well. There are 3 main omega-3s. This is our reminder for those of you who are grounded in your science already. There's the alpha-linolenic acid. That's the plant-based ALA. That's the one that's called the essential omega-3. They're all sort of wrapped into the essential omega-3 fats, but the real essential one is the ALA because it can convert. And then we have our EPA and DHA, the eicosapentaenoic acid, docosahexaenoic acid. Those are the longer chains that come primarily from marine sources that we know. The food sources are few, really. but they're the tasty ones that have versatility. So thankful for that. So as I mentioned, the fatty fish, for example, being a primary source of the EPA, DHA, and ALA is found in the plant-based foods like chia, like walnuts, as we know, flaxseed, soybean oil, and canola oil. So I wanted to talk just briefly, first, foremost, to remind you that we can be a resource to the research in this arena, but also to tell you a little bit about the recent research that may be of interest, and we can provide these studies to you. The health promoting properties of omega-3s is pretty well established, but it's an evolving field. And while most of the studies to date usually focus either on the totality of the omega-3s or the marine based EPA, DHA, or the marine sources, we are seeing increasingly the ALA, or the plant-based ALA omega-3, offers its own unique benefits. So first, I just wanted to highlight this particular study. Of course, the strongest evidence for the omega-3s, there's a variety in arena of areas, but the strongest evidence is on cardiovascular health. Again, primarily the marine-based sources, but increasingly the combination. And this is a 2014 review from Penny Chris Etherton and team at Penn State, concluding that ALA may be as effective in reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease as marine-derived omega-3s, EPA and DHA. But they noted, which I think is important, the context, is that it's probable that the greatest cardiovascular benefit will be dependent on the optimal quantity of all the omega-3s, the combined totality of the variety of types. And that may have to do, again, with not only the types, but the overall pool in the body, as well as the matrix of the foods that they come from as well. One other one, and I really hope that you all can check this study out if you haven't seen it already. This is a 2022 review paper from Penny Chris Etherton again, et al., and her team about the beneficial effects of ALA on specifically. It's a review article on ALA specifically. And this showed that increasing omega-3 ALA fat in the diet was associated with a 10% lower risk of cardiovascular disease and a 20% reduced risk of fatality from coronary heart disease. Why this is relevant is it really focused on the plant ALA. And this graphic here, which I extracted directly from the paper on the lower right of the screen, not that you need to be able to read it, but this just sort of reminds me, this really starts talking about the biological bases, the potential mechanisms, the hypothesis on how these beneficial effects from the ALA are happening. Some of them having to do with reducing markers of inflammation, some of them having to do with reducing atherogenic lipids and lipoproteins, some of them still unknown and unclear, but we're learning more and more as the science evolves and as the tools of science continue to evolve. And then just a few headlines on the next slide here. Thank you. Just about like a lot of additional research that is coming down the pipeline that we're starting to see, suggesting CHIA's nutritional components and the role of CHIA and the particular components of CHIA. One is from, and I think he may be in attendance today, from Dr. Rodrigo Valenzuela, Khalid and his team, a review article, very recent, on CHIA overall and the variety of roles that it may play in reducing the risk of chronic diseases, such as gastrointestinal related diseases, various types of cancers, cardiovascular disease, and more. So specific to that. And a lot of looking at this omega-3 ALA, but some research also highlighted here, and just a caption, again, research we can make available to you, by Dr. Loreto Munoz, her team out of Chile and Spain, looking at the benefits of consuming chia mucilage. So think of chia pudding and that great gel-like feature that chia brings, finding benefits in increasing short-chain fatty acids and in gut health and helping with the gut microbiome, as well as helping absorb glucose and cholesterol as it passes through the colon, through the intestine and colon, as in its help in reducing cardiovascular disease risk factors. Some other research that I think is really fascinating. I don't know that it's been completely teased out, and we've actually spoken to Dr. Valenzuela asking him more about this, but in trials with pregnant women in the 3rd trimester who are supplemented with omega-3 ALA, specifically chia oil, and having higher levels of DHA in the first 3 months, 6 months after birth of a child from nursing, and trying to understand a little bit more of the mechanisms there. So we know that chia itself has all these sorts of nutrients, but a lot of the impact may also boil down to, again, the matrix, because there's other bioactives. There are polyphenols, there are other antioxidants that are both, first and foremost, protecting the seed, this ancient grain, but also may have impact on human health. So there's a lot to sort of unpack here in terms of trying to disentangle which part it is. And it has made the research compelling and interesting. But we have an opportunity, actually. It's made it a little confusing for ALA specifically. But with the sort of invention of this mechanical cold pressing process into chia oil to purify and to bring some of this more concentrated ALA, there may be the potential for new research at getting at a little closer to the question on the impact of ALA. And Dr. Bazinet will certainly be helping us with that. The last study here, I'm looking at my time, making sure that we have plenty of time for questions at the end and a robust conversation with Dr. Bazinet. Some of you may have seen the headlines this past December on some research from Oregon State University. Scientists sequenced the chia genome and provided sort of a blueprint for some future research to capitalize on the genetics of some of what they call lesser known. We think this is a strong industry, but it's a growing industry, the orphan crops. And I don't know if any of you have been seeing some headlines, and it was brought to my attention, thank you, Danielle, an NPR story just a couple days ago talking about these, what they're so-called orphan plants, and the potential to save the globe. Now, I wouldn't call chia an orphan per se, but it's certainly lesser than wheat or corn in our rice that has made has become a dominant force in feeding world nutrition. And how can we tap things like the grass pea, or I love this new one, the lab bean, these different orientations of these so-called orphan crops, and paying attention to these. I want to just read something that I picked up from the NPR report that's not shown here, but this is the Oregon Health Study. It said that scientists estimate that just 6 plants account for 75% of the calories we get from plant sources. Those are corn, wheat, rice, soybeans, potatoes, and sugarcane. And really, if we want to save the world, we need to be looking at the sources that provide robust, sustainable nutrition, enough variety, the ones that can collaborate with Mother Nature, that can help us feed. And the researchers here in the Oregon study said, quote, "Now we are at the point where long-term food and nutrition security requires diversifying the human diet by breeding and making genetic improvement to nutrient-rich so-called minor crops like chia." So let's make it a major crop, or let's make it a big contributing crop so that we can diversify that. Before I hand it over to Dr. Bazinet, to Richard here, I'd like to switch gears just for a moment, just to share, this is a great resource I'm very proud of. I helped create it. I think it's a great resource that we have about Smoke Point. This allows us to shift into culinary for just a moment, and some of the applications of chia. When I started working with Banexia and Seeds of Wellness, one of the consumer brand here that I have bottled, and that you'll get some after our event today, we'll make sure that you can get some. One of the things that I saw was that when I searched, things as if I was a consumer, because I am, and a cook, and I wanted to know something like what's the Smoke Point, or what culinary oil should I choose for this application, it just wasn't there. It wasn't in the list. So we created, and we got it in the list as a way to tell this amazing story. Chia oil has a pretty high smoke point, 420 degrees. So it is something that can be cooked with, in spite of the fact that it has these polyunsaturated fats like How does that happen? It's been tested to be stable up to 420 degrees before it emerges with that smoke point. And part of it has to do with the strong polyphenols, the antioxidants, to help protect the oil when heat is administered. So it's a really great oil that you can use in a variety of ways that I'll mention here. And here I have some bread that we can dip in. You know, you can use it just like you use your olive oil for dipping. It's a light oil. It'll be fun to reconnect with you when you've tried it. It doesn't leave an aftertaste on the tongue. Organoleptic chemists have evaluated it, and I love saying organoleptic, by the way. I think that's just a cool word. But organoleptic chemists are the ones who can actually map out the science of what's the experience of the taste, the texture, the mouthfeel, the resolve. You know, it's why we get with olive oil the bitter or the cough test that some of us do when you have olive oil. Well, chia oil is soft. It has a silky finish. It's almost poetry. It's got a little bit of a nutty, seedy, toasty flavor to it. It does have some flavor and character to it. That's not a bad thing. That's a really good thing. It's earthy. You can taste maybe a little bit of the terroir if you get exploratory and you like wines and you know that sort of sentiment that goes with it. But it is a lighter oil and it has a diversity of applications. There's a lot of ways that you can use it. I mentioned because of its smoke point that you actually can bake with it. You can saute, you can roast. One of the great tips that I've learned from some chef friends is, you know, blending your oils or layering your oils at different stages of cooking. But it is so delicate also that you can use it in dressings and drizzles as a finisher. We add it to smoothies. I've put it into sorbets because I come from the spa world where you need the mouthfeel with the fruit that gets crystallized. You need the mouthfeel of the fats. And so chia oil has a lot of applications that way. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the chia seed and chia flour, which of course can go into baked goods, can go into a lot of things, everything from quick breads to smoothies to ready-made puddings to compotes to oats, morning grains and more. So there's a lot of applications there. And finally, before I turn it over to Dr. Bazinet here, industry. You're already starting to see it, and hopefully you'll start seeing it more and more, you know, in the better for you category, in the plant burgers, in chia pastas, in artisan crackers, baked goods. It's not just a way to bump up the nutritional profile and sort of meet the trend, which is sort of incredible, but it's an opportunity because of the functionality, the water absorbing properties of the chia into chia mucilage or gels that can help remove some of the additives, emulsifiers, colloids, and all those kinds of things. But it boosts up, it retains water, it's shelf stability. It's got a lot of cool things going on. So with that, I will hope you feel like sort of enticed about the chia nutrition story. We'll get research to you, of course, and I'm excited to turn it over to Richard, to Dr. Bazinet from the University of Toronto to lead us into the new horizon of chia research and ALA and all of the things that he's going to share with you today.
All right, sorry, I had a little trouble with the mute button. Thanks very much for that introduction. You know, it's a pleasure to be here today and to have the opportunity to talk to and update you a little bit about some of our research. You know, my story begins, geez, in the 1990s. I did an undergraduate in nutrition, and I got really interested in metabolism. And for my master's and PhD work, I studied ALA, which we heard a little bit about. And we actually saw on one of your slides, Wendy. I was interested in the role of ALA in inflammation. And we were studying this in the context of vaccines. If only we had done that work 20 years later, it might be quite famous. But if you go back, we were able to show that ALA was able to change vaccine responses. So it was a neat body of work. I then went and did a postdoc on the brain. And this was really exciting because, you know, put yourself back 20 years ago, we knew that there was a lot of this 1-omega-3 DHA in the brain. And we thought the brain was immunologically privileged. So it kind of had its own immune system. So it was a really exciting time because we knew these omega-3 fats could regulate inflammation. And we knew there was a lot of them in this kind of skull that was isolated from the rest of the body. So I was really excited to get a job at the University of Toronto after that, and I've been working for about the past 20 years really on how does the brain get DHA and what does it do when it gets there. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how the brain gets DHA in the next slide here coming up. So we heard a little bit about this, and I'll just get into a little bit of the details. So DHA, which is at the bottom of this slide, docosahexaenoic acid, is this 22 carbon polyunsaturated fatty acid that accumulates in the brain. And I'll talk to you about that a little bit later on. And you can essentially get it two ways. First is you take alpha linolenic acid, or ALA, which can come from chia, flaxseed, green leafy vegetables, and canola oil, and some other oils that we heard about as well. And you can take that 18 carbon omega-3 fat, eat it, send it to your liver, and slowly start elongating it, so putting more carbon molecules on it to this EPA, which will come up a bit later as well, and then eventually to DHA. So this is the omega-3 family. You can synthesize from the essential ALA to get DHA. The other way is probably a little more simple. You can just eat fish. So fish are, especially fatty fish, are good sources of both EPA and DHA. So I've been interested in this because DHA accumulates in the brain, and how do you actually get it from this pathway? And I'll just add out that if Rodrigo's on, I also worked with Rodrigo on this, and we actually published a paper on the details of this pathway over the weekend. So that paper should be online any day. It's a little more complicated than we're showing it to you in this cartoon right now. But anyways, there's two ways to do this, right? You can consume the ALA, convert it to DHA, or consume the DHA directly in fish. And so one of the things that comes up a lot is people say, well, we're not very good at converting ALA to DHA. And why do they say that? What do they mean? Well, if I give you ALA, your DHA levels in your blood won't go up. So that's one piece of evidence they argue towards that. The second thing is if we do something a little magical with the ALA, and I won't get too much into this, but each of those little kinks on the structure I'm showing is a carbon molecule, and we can put special labels on those carbon molecules and kind of watch them be transferred into DHA. And if we do that, we show that the transfer rate is about 1%, maybe a little bit less than that. So 1%, it's a low amount, right? If I gave you $100 and you gave me $1 back, it's a low transfer rate. But I think that's not the right question. And the question we need to be answering is how much DHA do we need? So, $1 return on $100 isn't very much, but if you only have to buy a gumball, it's more than enough. So we've been working that, and I'll get into some of the details on the next slide, but I just want to tell you one of the other neat things we did in humans. I told you if you give ALA to subjects, they don't increase their DHA. If you give that EPA precursor in the previous pathway, you also don't increase DHA levels. But what you can do with these tracers is you can show that all the DHA is in fact coming from the EPA. So that got us really excited and we're planning on working backwards in that pathway to test this with ALA. So there's two other things we have to know when we talk about DHA synthesis and whether we have enough going forward. Is that 1% really enough? And here's a study we just published, I think last year, the year before, where we got whole human brains, which is actually really hard to do. Everybody dissects little portions of the brain, but we found a brain bank. These things really exist, and we were able to get a handful of human brains sent to the lab, and we analyzed them to test exactly how much DHA is in them. And it turns out there's about 4 grams of DHA in our brain right now. And that's a lot. That's more than any other tissue kind of in your body. So the brain's just this beautiful, rich source of DHA. And you see that little test tube beside there with the little oil on the left-hand side of this figure? That would be about how much DHA is in that brain. And it might not look like a lot, but half the brain's water, half the brain's fat. And then if you can picture what's left, a fairly large amount, about 10% of that would be DHA. But again, that's not quite the right question. That's how much DHA you and I have in our brains. But what we know is DHA is consumed in these metabolic reactions. And this is a really exciting field that's really been taking off the last 20 years. So DHA comes into the brain, and we use it to make these anti-inflammatory molecules and help our cells talk to each other. And when we do that, we consume or we destroy the DHA, and we have to replace that every day. So if I could get the next slide, this is a really fun study that my colleagues did at the National Institutes of Health. And what they did is they took a handful of young males and they made a special radioactive DHA molecule and they infused it into their arms and they watched it go into their brain for a few hours. And this is an image of kind of that radioactivity where it goes in the brain. And they were able to do a bunch of math and calculate how much DHA is going into the human brain every day. And so the answer they got was 4 milligrams per day. So that was, I was in the lab at the time. We were really excited by these numbers, but the number was lower than I thought it was going to be. Okay, and I'll walk you through a few implications of that. First implication is we have 4 grams of DHA in our brain, and every day we use and replace 4 milligrams. Those are nice numbers. If you remember back in, my daughter's doing this in grade school, so I'm really fresh with these units, but there's 1,000 milligrams in a gram. That means it takes about 1,000 days to replace the DHA in your brain, or it has a half-life of we call about 500 days. So that number's low, and that comes back to this, it's a low synthesis rate, but the brain uptake rate might be very low, even lower than the low synthesis rate. The other thing is we eat in Canada and some of my colleagues in the US, about 1.5 grams, so 1,500 milligrams of ALA every day. And if we can convert that, I shouldn't have done this number on the spot, but we're talking about at least 15 milligrams of DHA synthesis per day. And so one thing you'll see is that 15 milligrams is higher than 4. Okay, so that's nice. If it was lower than 4, I'd be having a little bit of a different conversation with you. But, I recognize that the DHA doesn't just go to the brain, it goes to the heart, it goes to the immune system and other places. So one of the things we have to get a handle on is, what's that distribution of DHA in the body, and that 15 milligrams that we can make, if that's the real number, how much of that can get to the brain? So it's a question we have. We're happy that the number is greater than 4, but we need to work this out. Can it supply 100% of the brain DHA, or is it more like 75%? Can it offload some of it? So coming back to the low synthesis rate, yeah, the synthesis rate is low. I agree, it's 1%, but I'm thinking that the brain requirements are very low. And my working hypothesis is, anyways, is that we might have an opportunity here to synthesize a fair amount of the DHA for the brain. Could I get the next slide, please, Dan? So one of the things my lab does is we do what are called preclinical studies. We used to call them animal studies, but it sounds nicer to say preclinical now, although sometimes people don't know exactly what you mean. And so we do these studies where we infuse labeled ALA or labeled DHA into animals, and we try and model the uptake rates. And then we eventually try and push them into humans, like that slide I showed you forward. And so we're kind of halfway in the middle here. And in animals, we can show that the ALA can supply a lot, if not most of the DHA to the brain. But we have to do the key translational studies. And I think we have to be careful with animal studies. If you gave omega-3s to an animal, you could show that they cure Alzheimer's disease or the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. You've probably heard we've cured cancer 1 million times in an animal. We haven't been able to do that in humans. So I think that's a fair point and a fair limitation of some of these animal studies. But one of the things I like about animal studies is they give us the proof of concept, especially the proof of concept for method development. Some of these methods we're doing here, and I'm just showing you the pictures, have a lot of math, a lot of calculations behind them, and a lot of tracers and isotopes going through pathways and fluxes. And so what we're doing is we're developing those models in the animal and slowly pushing them forward into the humans with some new techniques. So I think we're at a position now where hopefully we'll be able to start, pushing these forward and answering the questions in the humans. And one of the important things is that, you know, we've been a little bit behind with ALA compared to studies with EPA and DHA. And part of that is the tools that we have available to us. So, you know, fish oil has been available relatively pure for a long time. For about 15, 20 years now, you've been able to buy relatively pure DHA and relatively pure EPA, and we can start to study them and, you know, look at how the blood responds to them and how the brain of an animal at least responds to them, and study them in isolation. The tools for ALA have been a little bit trickier than that. And I think things like CHIA, which are relatively rich sources of ALA with not a lot of omega-6s, and we can get into why that's important a little bit later, will give us a new tool to study this. So one of the things we're hoping to do in the near future is to do a dose response of this ALA into animals to see, can we optimize the amount going into DHA, and what are the effects of the omega-6 levels on something like that. Next slide, please. So I think this is important. When I got into nutrition, you know, we studied nutrition, something like vitamin C, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, you need so many milligrams, and you just put a safety factor on the end of it, and you tell the population to eat that. Omega-3s are a little different. There's, you know, this is nothing new here. There's some environmental issues around fish. There's a science paper here I've got in the bottom left-hand corner questioning the sustainability of that. Interestingly, this has really caught on in my colleagues. You can see the name, maybe David Jenkins, published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal. So not a place where you would normally have an ecological study, questioning if dietary recommendations, and you can see this in the bottom corner, to consume fish are sustainable. So I think this is important, and these people have a fair point. And what I think we really need to learn in the next few years is exactly how much DHA we need, exactly how much EPA we need, and exactly how much ALA we need. And we need to know this with precision, because we might not have that ability to say, okay, well, you need a gram, just multiply by 2, and we'll all be safe if, you know, these things are tied to environmental issues. And this challenge puts out, I think, a lot of opportunities. So I think that the fish oil industry has done a good job. Now you've got fish farming coming on board. You've got people looking at making transgenic plants, which are going to be a little controversial, but plants that can make EPA and DHA. You know, Europe's not a big fan of this technology. Some countries aren't. But then some people are saying, well, let's feed those plants to the farm fish to save that going forward. They can actually make transgenic animals that can make EPA and DHA. And obviously, they're a little bit more controversial. Some of my colleagues had a brilliant idea many years ago to say, well, let's just isolate the algae that the fish eat, and we can grow algae in vats, and we can get ALA and DHA. And then the other thing going forward that I think is not a fad or not a trend, but are these plant-based movements. So in Canada, our new healthy eating guidelines suggest plant-based diets and less meat. Obviously, some of this is a little controversial, but it shows a role, or at least, you know, we have to optimize how we do these plant-based diets, especially looking at vegans and vegetarians during development. So I think we need, you know, there's a lot of tools coming and a lot of opportunities coming forward here for advancement of new ideas. Next slide, Danielle, and I think this is my last one. So one of the questions I often get that I actually don't like is, you know, so should I eat salmon or should I eat plant-based sources of ALA? And I'm not a nutritionist, and I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a physician, so I can kind of cop out on my answer and not give you a real answer to that. You don't have to, I'm a tenured professor, I'm the worst at this, so I can't be forced into an answer. And I think the answer is it's neither, right? So, you know, I'm having yogurt in the morning. I'm not putting salmon on my yogurt. I'm not having it with fish oil. I wouldn't do that. But chia seed and some of these other things work very well with those kinds of meals and breakfasts. And Wendy, you showed that lovely little thing where you mix chia with either milk or a soy milk, and it gets this nice little jelly. My daughter loves that with some fruit, right? Conversely, some of these things won't mix that well with salmon or things that I'm having for dinner or my sushi that I enjoy. So I think it's a false question, right? I think you can enjoy both, and I think they're both very, fun things to look at and to eat and enjoy. And what we need to do, or at least what I need to do, is work on the precision of the answer of how much of these do we need, and how much fish, how much of the EPA and DHA do you need from that? And what can the contribution of the plant sources be to that? Can it be 50%? Can it be 70%? For the brain, I'm hypothesizing it's going to be a high number, but maybe for the immune system and some of the work we're not getting into, that, we're only going to make up a smaller proportion of that. But that's one of the things we're working on, and hopefully next time I speak to you, I can have a few more answers. So with that, I think I'd like to invite Wendy back on to wrap up.
Thank you. Well, if you're not fully inspired by that and the potential for the new research, and are we asking the right question? That's what I always love in science, is like, it's not new science, it's the evolution and then the use of new tools and techniques and strategies. So what I'd like to do, we've covered a lot in our time, and to open up to Q&A in just a moment, is just bring you an idea for those of you who are media, or again, if you're industry and looking for applications, to bring a little seed to story context for you. Danielle, if you could advance the slide. Thank you. Just a few ideas, like thinking about, we have the next generation of regenerative agriculture going on here. Regenerative agriculture is like the original agriculture, right? But new technologies and sustainability can bring it to the next 21st century, where it's already happening. You heard Sandra say that modern farming is happening, learning from mistakes from elsewise in South America and elsewhere around the globe. The future of food for the growing population. Can chia save the world? Can one seed, or these orphan crops, I don't know if I love that term, but can set the tone for feeding the globe and public health through the diversification of our diet. Ancient food with this modern nutrition story. I mean, we haven't had chia oil as such, cold pressed, mechanically pressed, available to us. That's thanks to an industrial process that also preserves ecological tenets. Modern food innovations that can happen, again, into the food supply. How can novel ingredients be funneled back into a smart, better for you, in between the aisles of the grocery store that we talk about, that also are landed in Whole Foods? And of course, Richards and others' research horizons and the new science that's coming down the path, and almost like saving that preclinical space. Those of you who know me already on the line know that I'm like always defending how all well-designed studies, no matter what type, have value. Yes, limitations, but have value. So look at some of these new mechanisms and incredible things that we're able to register in areas that we couldn't have before. And then, of course, the delicious side of things, bringing the science to the table, which is my absolute favorite thing to do, is conveying how we can bring it to the table. Just to finish here on my remarks, I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that we are working to provide resources. If we can look at that next slide for just a second, have resources for you, listen to you if there are resources that we can provide. The Smoke Point document with all that information, and why Smoke Point isn't the only thing we should care about when we're talking about culinary oils. Scientific papers landing in, where ALA is in cardiovascular health and others. As well as culinary inspiration, because, at the end of the day, if it doesn't taste good and you have great ways to get it into your body, you're not ever going to benefit from the information that you absorb through your mind. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Danielle, and a pre-thank you to everyone for being on the line today with us.
Wonderful. We've got a few questions coming into the chat box, so I'm going to get us started. The first one is for you, Richard. What does your work suggest about the predictive value of the omega-3 index? And maybe you can give a little primer on omega-3 index for those that may not know what that is.
Yeah, so the omega-3 index is a measurement in your blood largely to do with the red cells, but they do it a little differently now. And what the omega-3 index, it's a score, essentially from 0 to 10, except if you're a dolphin, it can go up to like 20. And it's the amount of EPA and DHA in your blood. And as you eat more EPA and DHA, the higher that index goes up. And Bill Harris, one of my colleagues, and Clemens von Schacke are kind of the pioneers of this, and they're doing great work with it. And what they can do that I think is really neat is they can correlate your omega-3 index with improvements in disease risk. And this works really well. Cardiovascular disease, a little less so for cancer and even things like total mortality. So the higher your omega-3 index, the lower your risk of those diseases. And I think this is really important. But these are correlational studies. Sometimes we call them observational studies or epidemiological studies. So why is that important? Well, for me, that's an exciting observation. And I think as a scientist, I have to now step back and say, why is that? Why does that relationship exist? And so at one end of the spectrum, you have a very simple answer. It's because the EPA and DHA are doing something and they're preventing the cardiovascular disease. Sure. At the other end of the spectrum, though, you have people saying, well, it's because fish is a little expensive and people who can afford fish have better health care and go see their doctor more. And we call it confounded, right? So I think this is a really important hypothesis raising work. Very important. I struggle with it myself when it comes to nutritional recommendations because it's a correlation, but it's a pretty good one, right? So if you want to play it safe, maybe you want to lean out on the correlation, but I'm a scientist and I'm interested in the causation. So I think the question you have is one of those questions where I don't perfectly have the answer. But that's kind of what I think we need to do is we need to see what proportion of that protective effect from the omega-3 index, whatever that mechanism is, can be supplied to from ALA. And I don't have a lot of precision on that answer. I think that's something we need to do more research. I hope Professor Harris and his colleagues in the future, when they do these studies, is they try and stratify the omega-3 index by ALA intakes. I'll tell you one thing that we've got going on that right now that I think is pretty neat, though. The omega-3 index is driven by kind of EPA and DHA, two of those molecules, and they put them together. So you always worry a little bit, is it the EPA or is it the DHA? But they combine them, and that's what the index is. But so when you give ALA, you don't get a rise in DHA, even though I think you can flux through that pathway. But when you give ALA, you can get a little spike in EPA. So my working hypothesis is at least some of the omega-3 index can be explained by the ALA, but I'm not sure exactly how much.
Thank you so much. And just real quick, I know we're at our official end time, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And just a couple things before we wrap up, and then we'll take a couple more questions for those that want to stick around. But just want to thank all of you for being here today. We're just so pleased that you could make it and spend your time with us today. We will be following up after the event. We'd love to get a bottle of chia oil to all of you, so stay tuned for an email on that. And then we do have a few more questions. So those of you that want to stick around, we're going to take care of those and stay if you can. If you can't, thank you again for being here. So let's see, we've got a couple more questions that came in. Wendy, I'm going to punt it to you first, but Richard, I think you might also have some things to say about it too. But we're wondering if there's any other studies on ALA and brain health other than the one or two that were shared in here, and if those findings are anything different than what we talked about today. Anything to add there?
Yeah, I would say that on the ALA review from Penny Chris Etherton, she has a very, as you can know, her team is always amazing, a very robust reference list. And I think that there are a couple others that she has reviewed in that space. Mm-hmm. But, I am going to turn it over and see if there's anything more specific sort of from your arena, Richard, in particular. There hasn't been a lot. Most of the focus, as I mentioned before, was on cardiovascular health. And the research on brain health and omega-3s has been sort of on the totality, the totality, maybe more focus on marine sources in some instances, or the total omega-3. The ALA space isn't like brand new. I mean, it's been happening, but I think it's really picking up pace in the last several years. But I would first go to Penny Chris. Well, I first go to Richard, and then second to Penny Chris Etherton's paper in 2022.
Yeah, Wendy, and I'll one up you there. So, nutrition and cardiovascular disease is kind of what got going, right? Ansel Keys, things in the 1970s, and that took off, and cancer took off, and I would say that nutrition and brain is at least 20 years behind. Okay, just across the board. So that's exciting from a research perspective. It means there might be some exciting opportunities out there. So there's not nearly as much. But one of my favorite ones, partly because it was one of the first and it was influential, it comes from what's called the Nurses' Health Study. And this is a cohort out of the Boston area, and there's a famous researcher, Walter Willett, who runs it. One of my colleagues I was in grad school with did this study, though. His name's Michelle Lucas. And what they did was they looked at mood. So in terms of brain research, we have some research on Alzheimer's disease, but the nutritional epidemiology of mood is really understudied, right? So they looked at depressive symptoms in the nurses, and they showed that the ALA content of the diet was inversely associated with mood. Again, it's a correlation. I don't want to understate that. But what was really interesting is they had this thing called an interaction. So we didn't get into this much, but there's also something called omega-6s. And it looked like omega-6s kind of interfered with the ALA's ability to do that. So if you had high omega-6s and moderate omega-3s, it didn't work so well. You really needed to push the omega-3s up. So that's, one of the first studies. Lucas is the first author. I think it's in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And one of the very few looking at ALA and mood going forward. So we need some trials. We need to show that, is this correlation or causation, but there's a very limited amount of work on brain health and nutrition. And that pool gets even smaller when we go from EPA and DHA to ALA. And I think it's something we have to look at now.
Great. And there was a follow-up question related to the cognitive health question. Has anyone done dose response of ALA in animals using carbon isotope analysis and correlating that with cognitive assays in the same animals?
Yes and no. So people have been able to show in animals that you can do dose responses of ALA, and some of this work comes out of the University of Bordeaux from Sophie Leye. And some of it's our work, and show that you can, match brain DHA levels to an animal-fed DHA, and that you can get similar behavioral scores. Sometimes I don't love to call the animals cognitive scores, but as you can get with DHA. So there's some proof of concept studies with the animals with ALA. One of the things, just so you know, with the animal studies, and if you want to dive into this literature, when we do studies where we lower DHA in an animal, we have to use what's called omega-3 deficiency, okay? And this is a little secret nobody will tell you. You have to take the ALA out of the diet completely to get brain DHA lower. So 95% of the studies that are looking at DHA, high brain DHA levels in animal compared to low, that low DHA levels are completely deficient, because a lot of my colleagues know if you put ALA as the control, your study doesn't work. There are a couple exceptions to that, but the vast majority of that literature. So I think, there is the proof of concept in the animals that ALA can improve their behavior.
Mm-hmm. Great. Sandra, I think this is a question for you. There was a question about using Bazinet oil, chia oil, in capsule form. Is that something that has been considered for future innovations, or anything to comment on that? Oh, let me unmute you real quick.
You're still trying to mute me, Danielle.
You're unmuted. Yep.
We are actually manufacturing a batch of soft gel caps chia oil subject caps now. So that will be a subgel with 1,000 milligrams of chia oil with 63% or 630 milligram of omega-3 ALA in that, with all the natural antioxidants and polyphenols and everything Wendy talked about packed in that caps. Well, there is a chia challenge that we will do with our marketing department and some customers and consumers participating in this chia challenge, taking chia oil, and we will measure their omega-3 to 6 ratio. The index, right, Richard? Was it in what was in this omega quant test we are going to do? I didn't read actually very well, but we will measure some of the parameters that are easy to measure as in your blood, you know, with these people who would be doing this challenge with us, and they will have free chia oil caps for some months. You know, no, so that is coming actually. Yes.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here again. I know we're about 10 minutes over, so thank you so much for sticking around. I know there were a couple other questions that had just come in, but we'll be sure to follow up on those and be in touch with responses, and look forward to staying in touch with all of you. I hope this was an inspiring conversation, and I hope you're taking away lots of new knowledge. Thank you so much again, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.